In this video, I want to talk about what is GraphQL. GraphQL, just to put it simply, GraphQL, it's a query language. It's a query language which allows you to get the data from the backend, but not just get the data, but also modify that data on the backend. So we have a server, we have a client, and they communicate with each other. Typically, it's done via RESTful calls, but GraphQL improved those RESTful calls. It's not just JSON, because JSON is not defined hard in stone. It's not rigid. It's not a schema. Typically, it's all loose, which can cause all kinds of problems. GraphQL is more compact and more eloquent syntax, which, similar to SQL, will allow you to manipulate the data, read, extract, load it, etc., modify it, do all kinds of things. So a natural question is how GraphQL compares to RESTful HTTP protocol or RESTful API and some other technologies such as RPC and SOAP. So let's start with SOAP. In SOAP, you would use entities and verbs in the URL. And RPC, it's similar to SOAP. RPC, you would also typically use verbs, and it's like a function. So remote procedure call, RPC, so you are calling a function. And let's say you have apples. So to get apples, you would create a new RPC call. To update apples, you would create yet another RPC call. To delete apple, you would create a third one. So that's not good, because you end up with creating a lot of endpoints and a lot of URLs, and you have to manage all that and validate. What about RESTful HTTP? RESTful HTTP is, in my opinion, it's slightly better in that particular sense, because in RESTful API, all you have is in the URL is just the noun, for example, /apples. And then you modify the HTTP method, for example, get, put, post, etc. So by modifying that method, what you are doing, you basically doing different operations. For example, get apples, you will read the apples, put apples, you would change the apples, and delete apples, you will delete an apple, etc. There are more methods such as patch, options, head, etc. But that's also not ideal, because every time you're working on the client, you have to go and modify the backend. Or you have to call or email your backend team to ask them modify that, which introduces a lot of delays and a lot of overhead in terms of communication and integration and testing. Now imagine you can do everything yourself. Then it's slightly better. That's why I like Node.js. You can build backend using Node.js, but that's not always the case. What GraphQL allows you, it allows you to basically have just one endpoint. That's it. You have just one endpoint, so you don't need to go to someone and ask to add something. Also, by using the schema versioning, it's very, very easy, because the schema would not allow any differences. And then once you build the schema and the backend, that's it. The client can request only the data that is particularly needed for that individual, that specific page. It's not gonna get extra data, it's not gonna get less data. So there's very little friction, there's very little communication overhead, extra work, because the client controls what data it needs. It controls basically the format and the output, the structure. You can aggregate data. You can get the data from multiple sources in just a single call. This is a performance improvement over, especially in HTTP 1, where you cannot do parallel calls. Okay, so this is how GraphQL compares to other technologies, and this is basically what GraphQL is. It's a protocol on top of the TCP/IP and on top of the HTTP or HTTPS, so we're still using HTTP. But unlike the REST, there's only one URL, and we're still using JSON. Yes, that's true, but we're also only using the post. We're only posting we're creating the post method requests, and in the body of that post request we're sending what data we need. Or if we don't need the data, it's just an update, then we're gonna send the new data to which to use for the update. Okay, so that's it. Now you know what GraphQL is and how it compares to other technologies.